Perfect. And I think we can start at the hour. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on coordination in practice, lessons from early childhood coordination in challenging context. My name is Maria Benavides. I'm the Early Childhood Development Coordinator for the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, or INEE. Before we start, I want to thank Sesame Workshop, the University of Virginia Humanitarian Collaborative, and the Moving Minds Alliance for their support and collaboration in developing this webinar. Sesame Workshop and the University of Virginia Humanitarian Collaborative partnered to better understand the success factors and challenges in the coordination of multi-sectoral early childhood development, including health, nutrition, protection, early learning, and responsive caregiving, particularly in areas affected by conflict and crisis. In this webinar, we will present learnings and share some assets that the cohort has produced so far and that can support practitioners in their work. We will also announce the next phase for the cohort, hosted now by the Moving Minds Alliance, and gather input from the webinar participants on the gaps and priorities the cohort should address in the future. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping points. Participants' audio and video have been disabled, but you can still actively participate through the chat and the Q&A functions. Please do submit your questions in the Q&A throughout the webinar. We will address them in the interactive session of the webinar. This session is being recorded, and the recording and presentation slides will be shared with all of the registrants by email, and we highly encourage you to share the recording with your colleagues. So let's get started. We have some great speakers for you today. First, we will have Emily Garin, Senior Director for Advocacy at Sesame Workshop, the nonprofit educational organization behind Sesame Street. Using research, programming, expertise, and the power of media, she leads the organization's efforts to put children and their families at the heart of the crisis responses. Prior to joining Sesame, Emily spent nearly a decade with UNICEF, working in Liberia, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and New York. As a leader in the global early childhood advocacy space, Emily is working with networks like the Moving Minds Alliance to reorient both programming and financing to the individuals and organizations best placed to reach children and caregivers. She's also working to create a global inclusion coalition, a multi-stakeholder effort to advance intersectorality in humanitarian responses. Welcome, Emily.
It's great to be here, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about the background to this group of coordinators that we had the great privilege of working with over the past few years. So if we can cue up the slides, we can get going. Great. So let me begin first, as Maria has, by thanking everyone for joining today and for all of the colleagues around the world that we've had the opportunity to work with over the past few years to create this cohort, and most importantly, to learn from all of the really exceptional work that's been going on in a wide variety of contexts. So I'm going to give remarks for just a few minutes that cover a couple of different topics. We can go to the next slide. First, letting you know how we came to create this cohort, talking a little bit about the breadth of organizations and individuals who participated, and then covering really some of the highlights of what we learned over the process. And we have a lot more resources that we can make available that you will see at the end of this presentation and will be made available in a follow-up email. So let me start with the why we ended up with a coordination cohort. A few years ago, we were working with the Moving Minds Alliance and others, thinking through what the best opportunities were for how ECD should be reflected in the humanitarian architecture and what the best models were that we could recommend to other organizations and sectors that were thinking about building a stronger ECD presence in their humanitarian response. Working together with the University of Virginia, you'll hear from a little bit later, we did a review of the existing structures, and it became quite clear that there really wasn't a single model that was the one that we would recommend for any number of contexts. There was a lot of different complexity, and really no one had spent a significant amount of time looking through and identifying what was working and what was not working in the wide variety of models that we have. So rather than making recommendations based on inadequate experience and consideration, we worked together with a number of organizations that were supporting ECD coordination and began the idea of creating a cohort of individuals who were actually in the field doing the work themselves. So we could hear from them about what was working, what their challenges were, what resources they relied on already, what resources were not available to them that they needed, so that we could help fill in a lot of the information about what was effective and what we needed to be supporting better as the kind of architecture of organizations supporting these coordinators around the world. So we began with a few coordinators that were supported through programs we were working on, and then expanded to an additional set of coordinators that were identified by other organizations in doing this kind of work. And we ended up with coordinators from around the world. We were very excited by the geographic and the background diversity of the folks we had. They met on a very regular basis, every couple of months, identifying the topics that were of most interest to them. And we sort of sat back and worked on the documentation and helped to identify what it was that was coming out as common themes, as common challenges from across the members of the cohort, to see what we could document in terms of lessons, both to support current coordinators, and it is our hope to support folks who end up in these roles or are hiring for similar roles sometime in the future. And that's really the stage we've reached now after about 2 years of work. And we're very excited to be transitioning to the next phase, which you'll hear more about toward the end of this webinar. So you'll see here the breadth of geographies that we had covered, beginning in Colombia, in Uganda, Bangladesh, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Ukraine. So we had a wide range. And what we think was also really interesting about this was not just the geographic diversity, but the mix of organizations and political entities that were behind the scenes supporting these coordinators or paying for the roles themselves. We didn't want it to come from a single model that was, all funded by a UN agency or all funded by government or all funded by an INGO. And so we ended up with a mix of coordinators who came from different experience backgrounds and who were part of an internal organization that looked quite different from each other. And that was part of our goal in understanding what it was that was going to, what models and lessons we could learn from that. You'll also see that there are a number of, there's a range of the acuity of the crises, from Ukraine right in the middle of things in Syria to more protracted crises like Bangladesh and Uganda. So there was a mix of the types of crises that folks were addressing as well. So we've got a number of documents that we'll show you, but I want to highlight a couple of the really big lessons that rose to the top in terms of quick tips and good lessons. I won't go through all of the detail on the right, but I did want to include it so folks can review on our own. But I think that, the first and most important thing that the coordinators identified was the need to really establish a mechanism for doing this. It doesn't work to do it in an ad hoc way. It doesn't work to rely solely on an existing structure to do the work that needs to happen for ECD coordination. So it should not be created from whole cloth. It's really important to engage the relevant clusters and sectors that are already working on it, but we do need to bring extra capacity and an understanding of ECD specific challenges and opportunities to the table. And within that, it's also incredibly important to start with the local leadership that exists on the topic and relevant to the work. ECD poses a unique challenge because it does not have a direct parallel in most government ministries. It also doesn't have a consistent way of being organized within the humanitarian system. And so that's why we think that this sort of mechanism has worked. There are a lot of different ways of doing it, but that's really step one in the recommendations from the coordinators. Step two, or the second recommendation, is making sure that we get the issues relevant to ECD into the assessments and the response plans. As everybody knows, in a crisis or anything else, that no matter how great the need is, unless that need is reflected, both in the assessment itself and then the actual appeals, it will never make it to the funding stage. There's no guarantee that being in the assessment and the response and the appeal will lead to funding, but there is a guarantee that if it's not there, the funding will not come. So it's really important to start working with all the relevant sectors, with health, nutrition, education, others, to make sure that not just ECD with capital letters is included, but really the unique and specific needs of the youngest children and their caregivers, whether or not that is considered formal ECD or it's just the unique challenges of that population. So make sure you're in the needs assessment and in the appeals themselves. The next piece is really the opportunity to start the programmatic integration. And so supporting, identifying the opportunities where sectors have a chance to work together. This is, I think, one of the great strengths that ECD can bring to the community, because we are accustomed to working across a lot of sectors and a lot of programs. So supporting that integrated actual implementation, ideally, through the ECD structure that's been created. Next, one of the really important learnings is making sure that you have the M&E pieces in place that are going to be necessary for making sure that that joined up approach is happening and is effective. And part of that, a really key part of it, is making sure that there are age disaggregated data available, and that disaggregation isn't just children 0 to 18. While 0 to 18 is an important disaggregation to have, we know that it's this youngest cohort, the under 8s or the under 5s, that have specific needs that often are not specifically sectioned out for funding or for particular attention to look at their outcomes. So starting with the data and then continuing with the monitor process is incredibly important. And finally, in terms of the quick tips and good practice, is advocacy. We know that there was a lot of advocacy going on from our coordinators, whether or not they officially had advocacy in their titles. The coordinators were regularly reaching out to government officials, to other sectors, to the humanitarian coordinators, to make sure that these voices and these issues and the needs of young children and caregivers were reflected. They did it both directly themselves and by mobilizing networks of local and national organizations. This is an issue that doesn't ever have as much money as it needs, and will never have that funding and support without continued advocacy from everyone in a position to do that. So those are the really quick details. You'll hear a little bit more in the coming presentation from Carlos about how that played out in his specific experience as an ECD coordinator. But this last slide here is really a teaser for all of the different resources that were provided and produced by the coordination cohort. So we had learnings over the course of it. The job descriptions document is a really great one for folks who are interested in hiring. These are really like scopes of work or JDs that you can use to copy and paste if you're hiring someone in a role like this. The coordinators help to identify what would be helpful to put in a coordinator toolbox. So that's a potential tool that can be developed. We have a lot more detail from Columbia on their learnings, and then the quick tips and good practice that I just highlighted. And finally, we've created a repository of all the information that came in from the coordinators over the course of the project, and that's accessible there in the link that you'll see in the chat. So I'll end there with a huge thanks, not only for everyone joining today, but for all the work that the coordinators put in to sharing their learning and experience with us over the course of the last 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily, for the detailed explanation of the cohort. It is wonderful to see that so many diverse stakeholders were involved. And I like to highlight the importance of considering children's needs from the start through needs assessment exercise. Now, I would like to give the floor to Carlos del Castillo, who's a consultant for Sesame Workshop. Carlos directs Bases Sólidas and is a senior fellow of the Rice Institute in the field of early childhood development policy and planning and implementation. For the last 3 years, he has been an advisor for Sesame Workshop, responsible for co-leading the ECD and Emergencies Working Group in Colombia. He has participated in several research and evaluations and conducted advisory services for UNICEF and the World Bank to support countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, the Pacific Islands countries, and Africa to design ECD policies, programs, and monitoring and evaluation frameworks. He also worked with the Colombian government as part of the intersectoral team responsible for the design and implementation of the Colombian ECD policy from zero to forever. Welcome, Carlos.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, so good morning, everyone. So before I start, I wish to thank INE, Sesame Workshop, and the Moving Minds Alliance, and the UVA Humanitarian Collaborative for having me in this panel to share the experience of the ECD Emergencies Working Group in Colombia. Next, please. So given the time we have, I will focus on these 3 categories that were previously presented by Emily. And for each one, I'm going to provide a context of what we have done so far and share the lessons we have learned, the challenges we have encountered, and some ideas to move forward. So next one, please. So let's start with category 1, establishing and maintaining ECD and emergencies coordination mechanisms. So the ECD Emergencies Working Group in Colombia aims to strengthen institutional capacities and intersectoral coordination by engaging Colombia's humanitarian organizations and relevant government agencies across all relevant clusters and sectors to support whole child development from the onset of mitigations and crises into stabilizations. So the working group works towards 3 specific objectives. First, to advocate for increasing access and quality of ECD services. And second, to strengthen monitoring and evaluation actions. Third, increasing awareness of the importance of providing support to early childhood in emergencies. Next, please. So this is the map of a complex humanitarian architecture in Colombia. So on the left side, we have the humanitarian team, which is led by OCHA, which has been historically in charge of coordinating the response to the humanitarian crisis caused by the armed conflict, natural disasters, sanitary emergencies, and the COVID pandemic. And on the right side, there is the interagency group of mixed migrations, which is led by UNHCR and IOM, which since 2018 is in charge of coordinating the response to the Venezuelan migration crisis. So the ECD and Emergencies Working Group sits exactly in the middle of both humanitarian architectures and is hosted within the education cluster, and is led by UNICEF and Sesame Workshop. And because of its holistic nature, the working group integrates all ECD-related clusters and sectors, and also works together with key government agencies from the national government, such as the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Colombian Institute for Family Welfare, among other key government agencies. Next, please. So let's reflect on the learning. So the first learning here is that forming the working group with all clusters and sectors has given a lot of sense to the need to work in a coordinated manner to ensure a child-centered approach. But the challenge here is that since the working group is not part of the official structure of the humanitarian architecture, working together between clusters and partners ends up depending mostly on the will of the individuals that represent the organization that's part of the group. So besides our will, there is no mandate for us to work together, much less to become accountable for what we do and must do. So to move forward, we strongly believe that it's critical to advocate with OCHA and the global clusters for the inclusion of an ECD in emergencies subcluster that could be hosted, for example, into the education cluster. That way, ECD working groups become an official part of the humanitarian architecture. And the second learning here is that due to the dynamics of the implementation of the national ECD policy in Colombia, government institutions have been working in an intersectoral manner for more than 12 years. And that made it very easy for them to join the working group that has the same intersectoral approach. However, the transition to a new government in 2022 that comes with different approaches and ways of working has represented a challenge for the continuity of its participation in the working group. So to move forward, and we believe, and we already started to work on this, is that we need to align ECD emergencies government priorities, especially those that were included in the National Development Plan and in the sectorial plans, with those of the humanitarian architecture, and agree with government institutions on how the ECD working group can help them to achieve their desired results and targets. Next, please. So let's continue with category 2, integrated ECD into the needs assessment plans and response plans. So among the many challenges we identified when Sesame Workshop commissioned a situation analysis of Venezuelan migrant children in Colombia was that information to identify children's needs was very sufficient and was presented in silos. And we also found that a specific response from the humanitarian architecture for young children was insufficient, especially in regards to early education. So in order to change this situation, we started a process to integrate ECD into the humanitarian program cycle. So the logic behind this integration, and then we go to the right side of the cycle, is that if we want more projects to reach more children, we need more financial resources. If we need more funding, we need to include ECD in the strategic planning. And to include ECD in the strategic planning, we need to identify and visualize the needs of young children in the needs assessment and analysis. So specifically in regards to the needs assessment analysis, we have understood mainly 3 actions. First, to advocate for a better data, we took part of the needs assessment technical team, which is in charge of the design and implementation of the needs assessment process. Second, based on the Colombian ECD policy framework and other frameworks, we revised the needs assessment questionnaire to identify critical ECD issues that were not identified through the needs assessment questionnaire. So based on data gaps for the last 3 evaluation rounds, we have been including specific questions to inform better on young children's needs. And third, we found that the needs assessment, the analysis of these questions was kept in sectorial sections. So in order to ensure a whole child approach, we are advocated for bringing together the analysis of these questions into one specific ECD section of the needs assessment report. And second, in relation to strategic planning, we took the following actions. So first, we make sure that young children and their families are included as a priority in all sectors. Second, we've been promoting coordination among clusters to ensure holistic response of ECD. And third, we also been advocating for the inclusion and submission of more ECD projects into the strategic planning. Next, please. So this is just a quick example of some of the figures we have developed for the 2023 needs assessment analysis. So what we did is that we worked together with several sectors to identify variables that could be converted in binomial indicators to calculate access of young children to key interventions. So as you can see, we included nine key interventions for young children to calculate access. And using the same indicators on the right side, we also were able to calculate the concurrence of those key interventions for each child included in the database of the evaluation. So for example, on the right side, that chart shows that 334 children out of the 550 children included in the dataset were receiving at the same time at least 6 of the 9 observed interventions. But most importantly, based on this analysis, we were also able to start drawing key messages to call for intersectoral action. So for example, in this analysis, we found that those children attending to preschool have more access to nutritional interventions than those who don't. Or we also found that holding the temporal protection status could be associated with a greater access to observed interventions. Next, please. So the first learning here is that it's important to continuously highlight ECD data gaps and include ECD-related questions in needs assessment questionnaires. But the challenge here is that there is always some sort of resistance to adding more questions as this require additional resources to gather and analyze the data. So to move forward, we will keep advocating for the need of including additional questions to keep expanding the knowledge and the needs of young children in crisis. The second learning is that it's critical to ensure that ECD data is consolidated and not broken into different clusters of sectors to ensure that holistic understanding of children's needs and response needs. The challenge here is that there is a sort of a permanent tension between the needs of the sectors to visualize the information from their sector and this proposal to bring together and integrate information under a whole child approach. So to move forward, we think that it's necessary to move towards a deeper analysis of the correlations that exist between sectoral interventions to raise the awareness of the needs for moving towards greater coordination and integration of ECD services. And the third learning is that working hand in hand with sectors contributes to the inclusion of ECD priorities and actions into the HRPs. However, in the end, and this is something that we have observed the last 3 years, HRPs do not mention ECD in a specific way. So therefore, priorities and actions are for a wider age range population, meaning for children 0 to 17 years old. So in addition, early childhood education continues to be underrepresented in the response due to the lack of ECD-specific indicators. So to move forward, we strongly believe that the global cluster should define more specific early childhood indicators, especially for early childhood education, that lead to the inclusion of a more specific ECD vocabulary in the HRPs and the submission of more ECD projects. Next, please. And finally, this is the last slide, strengthening monitor and evaluation ECD services. So besides what we have done in integrating ECD into the needs assessment analysis, in collaboration with the Ministry of Education and using the data of the ECD monitoring system, we developed an ECD in emergencies dashboard to support the needs assessment analysis, but also to support planning and monitoring. So this dashboard is like a visualization of an individual child tracking system that monitors currently access to 2.88 million children 0 to 5 years included in the database to 13 prioritized ECD interventions. So regarding major emergencies, the information can be filtered by migrants or by victims of the armed conflict, but it could also be filtered by municipality where a humanitarian crisis occurs. So the learning here is that partnering with the government to launch ECD data initiatives that complements the needs assessment analysis is a key strategy, and it's also a good practice that can support better planning and advocacy. However, disseminating the availability of these tools and promoting their use both for planning and advocacy is very challenging as it requires support and time to produce information for a specific context. So to move forward, what we want to do is to start producing like some sort of advocacy fact sheets for specific cases. For example, the status of migrant young children crossing the Darien Gap that can contribute to advocate for raising awareness and increasing response for a specific humanitarian crisis. So that's it for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carlos. The Colombian case truly shows how even with such a complex humanitarian architecture, it is possible to foster a sense of collaboration and coordination. Now we will hear from Nada Elatar. She's the Early Childhood Development Manager and Team Lead at UNICEF Uganda. Previously, Nada served as ECD Specialist at UNICEF headquarters, leading the global ECD in emergencies portfolio. Prior to joining UNICEF, Nada was a Senior Director of Educational Programs at Sesame Workshop. With a background in public health and child development, Nada has led teams that implement large-scale, multi-sectoral early childhood initiatives globally. Please come in, Nada.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you to Emily and Carlos for that great overview and introductions. I'm just going to pick up, I don't have slides for the group listening in. I'm going to pick up especially on the recommendations that Emily highlighted. You know, within the cohort, there was, you know, a clear need or recommendation to develop an ECD-IE coordination toolbox. You know, all of this work with the cohort that has been described by Emily and elaborated on by Carlos is extremely important. But we want to look at ways to be able to expand this work beyond the current set of countries that have been part of this cohort, and to also pick up the toolbox, pick up the development of the toolbox, so that we have a resource that other countries can utilize more easily. And also to have we were thinking and in discussion with many of the panelists here, looking at a way to continue, you know, this cohort, to have a home for the cohort, to continue deliberating, to contribute to the toolbox, and to bring in additional countries. So we're thinking about, you know, where this should be housed, you know, how it should move forward. And in discussion with various key partners working in the ECD-IE space, you know, we settled on the Moving Minds Alliance. And I'll just briefly talk about the Moving Minds Alliance as a host for this, the development of this toolbox, and also hosting of this, you know, longer term coordination between the cohort plus new countries. So the Moving Minds Alliance is, for those who don't know, you know, is composed of 30 plus agencies, funders, as well as implementing partners working in the ECD-IE space. There is a common mission within all the partners of the Moving Minds Alliance to really look at scaling up the financing, policies, and leadership needed to effectively support young children and their families and parents affected by crisis and displacement globally. So that's kind of the broad mission of the group. Within the Moving Minds Alliance, there are different, I would say, working groups that focus on specific areas. One of those working groups is focused on locally led action. And that has kind of a broad definition, but we're looking at ways to have countries, governments, local partners, local NGOs, as well as INGOs, really deciding on what kind of action they need to move the ECD-IE agenda forward. And we did feel that the development of the toolkit that Emily mentioned would be a great, you know, a great tool or a great, you know, resource for this group within the Moving Minds Alliance to take up developing. There are resources to develop the toolkit, and I think that one of the next steps will be to actually start initiating the development of the toolkit based on the recommendations that Emily has provided. I wanted to just elaborate on, you know, we talk about coordination, and a lot of our efforts are, you know, looking at really supporting coordination. That's what the toolbox would be helping to contribute to. But I wanted to just really thank and highlight the why we coordinate and why coordination is important, and thank Carlos for presenting that, I think, so well from the Colombia example. I think there's a lot of speculation sometimes from different funders and different people in the field of why coordination is important. I think this cohort has really produced some strong examples of why it is important and why it is important for us to continue to do the work that we do in terms of coordination. I'll just conclude. My intervention is short. I'll conclude by, noting that I think for any country that's looking to, in the absence of, a formalized ECD coordination group under the current cluster system, in the absence of that, we really do need to be looking at how we can expand the lessons that were learned from this cohort, how we can encourage governments and countries to, demand and to ask for such a coordination mechanism. And I think by demonstrating these good examples and providing a toolkit that clearly will demonstrate how you can emulate and do this in your country, I think will be a huge added value to our sector. And I think, Maria, with that, I will conclude and hand back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nara. Great to hear that this cohort that has done such an incredible job in understanding how coordination can be achieved in different settings will continue. And for the discussion and interactive part of this webinar, we welcome Kirsten Gelsdorf, Professor of Practice of Public Policy and Leadership and the Director of Global Humanitarian Policy at the Frank Baden School of Leadership and Public Policy. Kirsten brings over 20 years of experience working in the humanitarian sector. She co-leads the University of Virginia Humanitarian Collaborative, a research initiative bringing together scholars, global practitioners, and students to develop research and policy supporting the needs of vulnerable populations caught in humanitarian crisis. Through this, she has served as the principal investigator as well as co-lead of numerous applied research projects for organizations such as the United Nations, the American Red Cross, Sesame Workshop, and the German government. Please, Kirsten, come in.
Hi, thank you. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to have all of you here. For this portion of the webinar, we thought that because what we're really talking about today is this cohort that has been established and has been running somewhat of a standalone project and now is transitioning into the Moving Minds Alliance and a broader coordination structure, we wanted to use a little bit of the time of this webinar to actually do something a little bit more interactive and also gain some more perspectives from all of you watching to kind of help Netta and the Moving Minds Alliance see as to where and what the cohort can do going forward. So we prepared a Menti that Sesame and INE have, and so Sam is going to be working behind the scenes with me to get this going. And so Sam will jump in if we have some technical challenges. But for those of you who aren't aware of what a Menti is, it's basically just an interactive tool so that we can kind of get some discussion going in real time with a large audience. So we have about 4 questions prepared that we wanted to kind of go through. And in looking at these questions, we then wanted to be able to see what your thoughts were, and then also give you a chance to ask some questions. And you will do that by kind of raising your hand, and then Sam will take off your mic and we can discuss that way. So this is our first question. And if you look in the chat, Sarah has put in how to join the Menti and enter the code. So if with your phones, you can scan the QR code in the bottom left corner there of the slide, and you enter the code in. And then what we're asking first is really, what we discovered with the cohort was to understand what the barriers are for effective coordination. And I already see in the question and answer, right, there are some larger questions about, and Netta just mentioned, the cluster system. But we wanted to kind of ask these different questions. So if you look at these different options, so clarity of what ages fall under ECD. Yep, so we're already getting some responses in. If everyone could just, we'll take a moment to kind of vote, and then we'll kind of look at where we're at. So what we're already seeing is it looks as though you have here the issues of people being too busy to participate in coordination, lack of support from, let's say, major kind of individuals or organizations that have coordination authority. So between OCHA, humanitarian coordinators, or local governments. There's competition for resources, the cluster issue. So maybe what I would love to find out is if someone who has voted on one of these issues, and I also see in the question and answer that Susan, you have made a couple of comments also around the issue of clusters. If someone could kind of come in from the audience, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you. I'd love to know a little bit more about what you're noticing about one of these challenges. So maybe if we can just unmute Susan, if that's okay, if I call on you, given your questions, I think very much they very align with this. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hi Susan.
Hi. Well, this is just my experience, and I'm a bit out of date, so I wouldn't like anybody to really take me as face value. But I mean, knowing systems quite well and governments and work on the ground quite well, what I've raised is always, I mean, I co-chaired the education cluster for a few years, but these are just the issues that sectors are so ingrained, and there needs to be some kind of a formal architecture. And you know, there's such a big push from the ECD people now, because we realize the importance of ECD to absolutely everything else in a child's journey through to adulthood, that maybe we have to have a really big focus on elevating the importance of it. It took a long while for education to become a cluster because it wasn't seen as a frontline response to an emergency. And in similar vein, we have to do this with ECD. While other things are happening, there has to be a big push to try and make it a subcluster somehow. And I noticed that Colombia is trying to make it in the education sector as a host. That's the issue with ECD. It's like more than one sector. So that's all. I mean,
I think that's correct. I think that there's a lot of, I think that we noticed that with the cohort, that there were a lot of different questions about, you know, how do you get this under one cluster? And then also the challenges of, depending on which cluster it's under, how you ensure intersectoral coordination or other clusters to then still come into that subcluster. So I just returned from Bangladesh, from Cox's Bazar, and there ECD sits under the education cluster. And with the current rationalization process, there's a lot of thinking now about, you know, how to make sure programming is more efficient and effective. And so the focus is really on this 3 to 5 age range also, because that's where the education cluster has some authority with ECD. And so I think these are continued challenges, and for not just for ECD, but for different intersectoral coordination mechanisms. Emily, did you want to come in also?
Yeah, I think that the point is really well taken in the comment as well from Susan about, you know, do we really mean integration or do we mean coordination? And I think what we've learned from this is that we should start at the bare minimum with coordination, in making sure that there is communication between the groups, there is as much elimination of duplication as we can get, and then it's always sort of working toward actual long-term integration. One of the other things that's been really clear is that so much of it is contextually dependent on the overall size of the response, the funding that's available for the response, the willingness and political appetite of the government to cover certain issues, or not, as the case may be. In some countries, we've heard really great examples like Colombia, where the government's already done a great job of integrating non-Colombian children into their national ECD systems. In other contexts, there's an unwillingness to call it ECD because the government isn't providing that service to its own children, let alone to non-national children. And so I think that's one of those places where we take the basic lessons and apply them and tweak them a bit for what's going to work in that given context. And I think that flexibility has been really helpful. But to the point of a global cluster, this is another piece of work that the Moving Minds Alliance has been working on in looking at the examples of other cross-cutting issues and how it worked for them to try and create their own cluster to become a cross-cutting topic, et cetera. And we do have a full report on this that I'll drop in the chat in a little bit about what all of those other issue areas have recommended based on their own experience of trying to create a space for themselves within the formal architecture. I do also think that in the years to come, there is a lot of ambition from OCHA and others to think more about human-centered programming that starts with the child or the caregiver at the center and then sort of works out away from the cluster model. It's going to be incredibly difficult to break the traditional cluster system, but if anything can, I think it is a topic like ECD, and we have a lot of interest in, as the Moving Minds Alliance and INEE, starting to engage there and see if we can make a good case study out of ECD as a way of looking at more human-centered design. But thanks for the question. I think it's very realistic and good one. And the answer is we'll do the best we can, and there isn't a single model, I think.
Why don't we move on? And I'm going to suggest, Sam, that we move to the third slide and we skip the word bubble for now, just in the interest of time. Given that I think that this question also nests really nicely with what we were talking about. I think that one of the questions especially I know that INE and MMA are thinking a lot about, right? Like how can, at the global level, we do these webinars, like how do we support local and field level? And so we were hoping that you all could put in some different ideas into this slide for some actions and some thoughts about how you felt this might work, based on what you heard in the presentations and also just your general knowledge. And we'll just give you a minute to kind of put in a couple of thoughts. And I also see one raised hand, and why don't we take that comment simultaneously? It looks like Sharifo. Let's see. Are we able to unmute Sharifo?
We have, but
okay.
We cannot hear them, so I'm not sure if it's...
Okay, maybe we're having a challenge. All right, anyone else, feel free to raise your hand and we will, I see Joram or Yoram.
Am I able to be heard?
Yes. Yes, please go ahead.
Most have field level by showing the information flow, especially about the current needs and best practices and lesson needs. And the mentorship
Having a bit of a challenge hearing you from the microphone.
Yes.
Maybe you could, otherwise maybe if you want to type something into the question and answer, and then maybe we can read it out that way as well.
Okay. Let me do that.
Thank you. Well, it looks like we already have some really interesting comments here, right? So data management experts to support analysis and the design of advocacy. I think, Carlos also mentioned that as well, the amount of time that takes. Creating written resources that can be used by local staff. Sector specialists can advocate to local sector level clusters. Learning about priorities, asking about what they need, which I think is kind of what we hope to also do by having this cohort project and expanding it. And for multi-sectoral organizations, pushing other sectors to work better with ECD. So if an organization has a health team and an ECD team, they need HQ guidance to make health coordinate with ECD. Are there any comments on this, Carlos, or do you see anything here that that resonates with you based on your experience? And want to give maybe an example? Because you had mentioned also the advocacy briefs, and I know that this is an issue also in Bangladesh of like collecting evidence and getting advocacy briefs going.
Sure. So, for example, the needs of these data management experts is quite critical because like there is a lot of information that needs to be like created from the ground, let's say in the needs assessment analysis, but also it needs to be analyzed and in a complex manner. So I think coordinators don't have the time for doing that analysis, and sometimes don't have the expertise as well. So I think having the support of these data management experts is critical to take like a further step the data and really create like advocacy pieces that have the power to really influence in different sectors and so I think that's something that is critical, at least from my perspective. And the other thing that I see here is the thing about indicators. I think that's another issue, at least from our experience, for example, in the education cluster, is that we have been advocating, at least from the regional level, to include these early childhood education indicators. So because currently what we have is indicators for children 6 to 17 years old. There are no indicators for 0 to 5. And if they are not breaking, like they don't separate the age. They are not disaggregated into age. So I think it's also important to start thinking about what sort of specific indicators do we need, because that way, if those indicators are created, we know that the needs assessment and the people in needs, for example, when they calculate the people in needs, is very attached to the indicators. So I think that's something which is also critical, to have ECD specific indicators across all sectors. Over.
And I think that this is something that we can take on at the headquarters level in these different coordination forums and try to think about how to support. And I know that there are also aspects of this that are mentioned in the toolbox. I wanted, we have a last couple of minutes, I wanted to also pass over to Oliver Lacey Hall, who is my collaborator at the University of Virginia and helped bring together the cohort and write some of the different documents and materials that you saw earlier. And Oliver, I just wanted to check, I know you had also made a comment about government, and so I just wanted to kind of hand over to you for a second to see if there was something else that you kind of wanted to add from the learnings.
Gosh, thank you, Kirsten, and thanks very much indeed. It was a real pleasure working with the team on this. The only point I wanted to make was in relation to coordination, and I think it's already been said, but maybe it's just worth repeating that every location that we looked at, and we looked at 6 locations, had a very different coordination dynamic and a different set of coordination needs. We looked at Jordan, we looked at Uganda, Colombia, Bangladesh, and Syria, and one other, and I can't remember which one it was. But they all had extremely different coordination needs and capacities. And a lot of what we found was that where you had really strong and decisive government leadership, things tended to work quite a lot better, both within the national context and also in terms of the kind of connection with the so-called international humanitarian system. So I think that's just one thing to keep in mind, that when we reach out and say we need to clusterize this, in some contexts, yes, we do, and in other contexts that may not be the way forward. I think that's the only thing I'd like to add. I think it's been a very rich discussion. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Well, we're on our last few minutes. I just wanted to make sure if anyone else had any kind of burning questions, please go ahead and put them in the question and answer, and we can see how we can respond or call on you to see what the panelists can answer. But I think in general, I think that last slide kind of gave us a really good indication of some of the things that we wanted to pass on to Netta. And you're all always welcome to please send in any other comments or questions for the cohort. You can send them to myself or to Sesame and see how we can support. And I hope that you all are able to check out the different resources. So I'll pass over to Maria to wrap up.
Before we wrap up, I just wanted to flag that there's a couple of comments in the Q&A if you would like to address those, or if not, that's okay, we can address it offline.
Oh, I see. Okay, there's one more here. Some of the yes, I think there's one here that's about kind of different contexts. And I think that that's one of the things that we actually also recognized. And I think kind of Emily was talking about that, is that, I think a coordination one-size-fits-all model can be incredibly complicated. I think that's what we're actually, the reason the cluster system was formed was to have some predictability and to make sure there weren't gaps. And I think that one of the challenges is that we now see the limitations of that. And so I think what has been interesting, especially from the cohort, one of the interesting findings is that sometimes it is good to have flexibility about where and how an ECD coordination model can exist, so that sometimes, yes, it can be more firmly established within the government, other times within the education cluster, other times it can be a subcluster within protection. And I think that is actually one of the advantages, but I think that is an advantage at the local context. And then at the global level, I think that what we've learned is the more standardization of tools and services, and advocacy in particular, just how important advocacy still is. I think many of us on this call are working within ECD in some capacity, but for the wider humanitarian system, ECD is still something that people are still gaining knowledge on in different ways and in these different contexts. And so I think that that's going to be a continued challenge, is something that needs to, in addition to kind of producing tools and services, the continued advocacy is going to be necessary.
Thank you, Kirsten. And with that, I will just want to thank you so much to our wonderful speakers and to everyone who joined us today to learn more about how coordination can be achieved in challenging contexts. And a reminder that you will be receiving the recording of this web event and all related presentation and links via email, and this will be also posted in INE's website. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and thank you to our speakers.